All right, well, good morning, divas and dudes. I am so excited for our class. For the next month, we are going to be digging deep into the Mediterranean culture. For February, we're going to be looking at the beautiful world of Italy and really looking at what uniqueness is wrapped into their foods. One of my favorite things of my career is really learning about other cultures through their food. So much is steeped in what we cook. It has a great representation of the area, the landscape, and of course the heritage, and we celebrate around food, and so it just brings in so much excitement and culture to get to study a country through its food. And you know that for many months we've been looking at the Mediterranean diet and always looking back at how that style of eating has really developed an uncanny secret around longevity and lower risk of morbidity and mortality, and we'd love to know why it is. So we are going to look into the world of the Italian cuisine. And so the flavors for health and longevity that are really at the heart of this beautiful country that is really wrapped around the sea. As I was doing some research, I found that it's kind of neat that the name Italy, we think, came from the land of the young cow, which I thought was kind of cool, but it really makes sense when you start looking at this beautiful countryside. It grew from a really ancient people group that ate from the land, and so cattle was something that they were able to really have as part of their food sources because they had such rich countryside in which to let the cattle graze. So in addition to this full history and tradition, what I love is that the Italian culture is so rich in the strength of family. I mean, you can even sort of chuckle and know that the family is the heart of even some of the dark side of culture, which when we think of the Italian the mafia and the mob, and it's so funny. We chuckle, but yet the whole richness was around this long generational impact of the family. And so I think it's so exciting that we get to learn from this. And of course, Rome was one of the most important cities of our history, and I also love that the population is so richly steeped in Christianity. We can even look back in the Bible and really see how Rome was a really big influence. And, so it's really exciting to see what we can learn from this country. I also thought it was interesting that while we learn a lot about the culture around the agriculture, we know that there's some really important crops that come from Italy. What can you think of? Wine and grapes, yes. And what? And olives, yes, exactly. So olives and the viticulture are really powerful. And yet these agricultural companies are a very small percentage of their GDP. And moreover, they're actually run by families rather than what happens in the US. Our big agricultural companies, are they run by families? No, big corporations. So that, I think, is really a unique element as well. And so when we look at Italy as in geographical terms, it's the 8th largest economy in the world. So pretty impressive. So when we look at it in dollars, at $2 trillion US dollars, Italy is able to produce, and that's comparing to the US and China and Japan as being number 1, 2, and 3. Italy is made up of 450 islands, which I didn't know either. And as you look through, you can see all those little dots. And so, of course, there's the big islands, Sicily and others, but there's so many little islands, which again allows culture to probably evolve a little bit slower. And that keeps the heritage so rich. Also, what's unique is the Apennine mountain range runs all the way down Italy. So now we've got this environment that has mountain ranges and we've got the sea very close by. So what do you think that does to the richness of the soil? We get runoff from the mountains, so that adds richness to the lower lands. And we've got all the minerals that we see from the sea that now really give a rich environment for growth of herbs and spices and gardens, etc., not to mention growing or grazing of the cattle. I thought it was interesting too that 76% of the territory is actually made up of mountains and hills. So you don't see a lot of flatlands in Italy. Also, Asia and Europe are home of some of the world's oldest populations. Those that are aged 65 and above. At the top is, of course, Japan, and they have 28% of their population above the age of 65. And then we've got the other countries. And so when we look at Italy at 23%, and then we've got Finland and Portugal and Greece are all the top 5. But what we see is, 23% of the population over the age of 65. Now, that's not counting the baby boomers of the U.S. I just think it's so interesting that they have a lot of people that live to be even 100 years and older. 12% of China's population is age 65 or above, and that share is 16% in the United States and 6%, so it gets much smaller. Look at that in Nigeria. People do not live very long, 3%. So they are dying early. And of course, we could say, could it be from disease or could it be from accidental death? Who knows? But I think what's really key is we're learning that the Mediterranean lifestyle does help with people living longer and older ages. And I popped this slide in too, because this is always what we're thinking about. I know there's a lot of gobbledygook on this slide, but suffice to say that when we look at cancer risk, we are able to show that people groups that live in a country like Italy, or they're born there and then they move to a place like the US, what do you think happens to their cancer risk? It goes up. Yeah. So even when we track people that are native born and they move to another country, their risk goes up. Now, interestingly, look here in the conclusion. Generational differences in smoking prevalence patterns between the US and Italy may explain the advantages for Italy-born Americans. So the good thing is there are some advantages to moving countries. While our risk of catching a disease seems to go up when we come to an industrialized nation, we have better medical coverage, we have earlier detection. And so, there really is a pro and con to moving to the US. And interestingly, that the Italian population has had 2 very large migrations out of Italy. One of which is because it was overpopulated and there was a lot of disease and people were sickly. And so getting out of that area and going to a country that could take care of them better, guess where that was, the US, was something that I thought was also very interesting. But let's suffice to say that when the people groups stay in their native country, they do see less incidence of cancer. So aging well, centurions abound. Like I mentioned, the population over 65. Also in Italy, there's a very high percentage of people over 100. So pretty cool. Anybody know somebody that's made it past 100? Past 100? I used to work with a photographer, and we did 2 birthday celebrations of little ladies that have their 100th birthday, but granted, it's not very common. So when we look at a typical Italian, we think of what item that they love to eat. Pasta, right? And it's as simple as it can be. Durum wheat, egg, and water. And so often it's made from scratch and is this beautiful part of their heritage. But isn't that amazing that 51 pounds of pasta on average is consumed by the Italian? From pizza to pasta, Italians seem to know some secrets to health that are probably missing in our Western diet. And here's an interesting point. With our traditions of what we learn from other countries, do we keep them the same or do we change them? We do. So this is a beautiful traditional pizza, and it's decorated to celebrate, what do you think? The green, the white, and the red? Yes, the Italian flag. And it was first created by a chef, I think it was in Sicily, to present to the Queen. So this is, long ago. And so it was in celebration of the flag. So I thought that was really neat. We'll see too that there's some variations. So pizza, yes, but do you think pepperoni is part of the pizza? It is not. In fact, if you go to Italy and you order a pepperoni pizza, you're going to get eyebrows raised. So, of course, I told you what it really means here in the slide, but I think it's hilarious that we imagine a pepperoni pizza being wholly traditional. Now, we can actually go years back. Pizza was originated in Sicily around the, I think, 18th century. But before that, Chinese had created something like a pizza, but it had different toppings than what evolved here. And actually, the tomato was brought over from the Western continent, also back in the probably 16th century. And so even, we can trace this idea to the point before the tomato sauce. So it's kind of fun to see how the world starts sharing ideas. And that's exactly what I love so much. And what we do at Powerhouse Bakery is learning from other cultures and maybe doing a little twist on the original, but loving the fact that there's this original idea that we started with. So we have it, that staple, pasta. Now, each region is going to have its unique specialty. So back in college, I managed an Italian restaurant of all things, and the chef was first generation, so much so that he did not speak English. He was this little Italian, and he had a temper. And of course, from my husband, he says, yeah, all Italians have a very hot temper. And that was him for sure. He would get very hot if something, didn't go right in his kitchen. But look at the styles. Not only the type of pasta, but also the toppings. So we've got areas or regions of Italy that focus on the cheese as the sauce. Some of them add seafood. Some of them will just keep it really simple with tomato. Almost all of them are going to use some sort of herb. And then some might even add meat. So I don't know if you can see some of the pictures, but let's see the little chef there in the middle, and he's kicked the fettuccine Alfredo out, because that is very much not part of that region. So I thought it was kind of fun. But we're going to, in a few slides from now, we're going to show you some of the other types of pasta dishes. But one thing I think is so important in the Italian cuisine is really high quality ingredients, very simple ingredients, and the technique is always something that's handed down from the generations. So you'll see as we go through some of the street food, what really makes it a specialty is if the person cooking it knows the secrets of the preparation. And so, I teach about things like this all the time at the bakery when I try to teach how we use a very hot cast iron skillet. And you put the product in a hot skillet. You don't put the skillet on the heat, add the oil, wait for it to heat up, and then put in our stuff. That would be very bad. The Italian chef would look down their nose at that, because you have to start with a hot skillet before you put anything in it. Now here we've shared a term from the French, which is the mise en place, which I use in my cooking recipes all the time. So while that skillet is heating up, then you gather your ingredients, and now the magic begins, because you add in the hot oil, then you add in the ingredients. Now there's even techniques where I don't even add the oil in first. I add the product in, like mushrooms and even cabbage, because it allows a wonderful browning reaction before the oil hits it. So it preserves the oil a little bit. Instead of letting the oil heat up, it's actually protected by the food. So these are techniques that the Italian chef absolutely celebrates, because that olive oil is such a special ingredient. They want to make sure that it does not lose all the nuances of the flavor. So anyway, it's a fun little slide, and we're going to explore a lot of these fantastic dishes. But the staple that we think of, pasta, ouch, is we don't stop there. There's so many other neat staples. So that is a beautiful, don't you just want to grab a bite of that? What sauce do you think is on there?
Pesto.
Pesto! Yes. Now, what do you think about the spaghetti and meatballs? Don't read my notes. Is it traditional or is it a fusion? The staple, but the meatballs are not traditional. The polpettes are eaten as a standalone and usually in a soup. So you will not see spaghetti and meatballs as a traditional dish in Italy. Who would have thought? Now they will add a meat sauce, but not a meatball. Did anybody know that? I think it's so cool. So, it's fun how they'll evolve. Simple herb and olive oil is much more traditional, and then it evolves. Now, interesting little tidbit, this evolved when the Italian immigrants realized that they could charge a lot more for the dish if it had meat on it. So instead of a, kind of a peasant food of just the pasta, they put the meat on and they can triple and quadruple the price. And, there you go with the smart businessman, probably mafia driven, no less. So when we look at, gosh, how did the pastas really get served? Again, super simple, olive oil. And there's different flavors in the olive oil. So when I worked for HEB, I got to go to this really cool class. And we learned about all the different flavors and nuances of olive oil. So if it's grown in a region that has the mountains, it will have a much more fruity flavor than the ones that are grown in the lowlands near the ocean. So more fruitiness versus more kind of a smoky, sublime, subtle flavor. Of course, that also has a bearing on how long the fruit is on the vine. If it's picked green, it's going to have a lot brighter, more astringency. If the olives are more ripe, then they get a more amber color and they're a little bit softer flavor. So people will often ask me at the bakery, what's a good olive oil? And truly, it's really about what flavor do you want? Oftentimes you'll get a blend, and that's because people are okay with a blended flavor. You can, just like a good wine, a flavor that you create can sometimes be better than a single flavor, unless you're really looking for something unique in that. And so in this class I took, it was the weirdest thing to have a little shot glass of olive oil, and you actually drink the olive oil and you swish it around. It was so interesting. And then you have to wash it down with a little wine and right? All right. But that's what the Italian families talk about, is what quality of olive oil are we using? And where did you get your garlic? And how did you harvest your herbs? So all those ingredients are huge detail. And, that's something that I think the American chef has kind of lost track of. Because we are all about what? Convenience, right? Speed and convenience. We've sort of, now of course there's exceptions, and we're changing now for sure, but a lot of even what happened in the 50s and 60s, the home chef was taught that if you are anything, you're going to have things that are pre-done for you, so you don't have to be stuck in the kitchen. So the thought of, working in the kitchen, that was peasantry. That was for people that couldn't afford the processed and the fast, quick cook options. And so it's so interesting that idea never really took on in Italy. It was much more important to procure very specific high quality ingredients.
That's like that show on Channel 9. I think it's Lydia. On Saturdays they show a lot of cooking shows.
Yes.
She makes all these, and she makes everything from scratch.
Yes.
And she chops and does everything from scratch. I like to see her.
Yes, I do think that that's coming back, especially with our whole wave of eating more from the earth and understanding, how longevity and our health is profoundly impacted by our food choices. And I think we just sort of lost touch of that, or maybe just never really knew how to connect the dots on that topic. But because this was not driven by health, this was driven by what? Flavor and technique and the whole history and and value that the family heritage shares through food. So, the beautiful world of cheese. This is something that is also very much shared in the world of France, is that cheese is absolutely integral in their cooking style. In Italy, some areas more than others, but all areas of Italy will celebrate cheeses. And why do you think this is? Because of their living close to cattle. So the cattle provides the dairy and, of course, the meat. And then to preserve the dairy, cheese becomes a really important component for the peasant farmer, and then all the way up through the contemporary chef. Having cheese is really important. Yes, good one, Rachel. This is ricotta, and then the hard cheeses, and then everything in between. So again, lots of conversation around the different profiles of flavor and the nuances that we want to create in a dish are really driven by the added cheese. So, and it's such an exotic flavor. Anybody ever try some of the porcino and Parmigiano Reggiano? I know you have, for sure. Yeah, just beautiful. In addition to the cheeses, the other very important component is the greens, the fresh herbs, and of course, the vegetables that are part of the dish. So getting canned items would certainly happen now, but in the early days, it was all about how you were able to grow your crops and even share with your neighbors your different crops. So of this lineup, we know rosemary. We know sage. Laurel is a little more unusual, right? We don't see laurel as much. Basil, we know. I mentioned that tomato really wasn't native to the Mediterranean, which really surprised me. It was brought over, albeit many years ago, but it wasn't traditional. And then garlic and onions are a great crop because they grow so well underground. So they're really a versatile and sustainable crop. And then, of course, peppers. We have learned about peppers, right, in a few classes ago. And there's lots of varieties. Little less common in the traditional Italian cuisine, but as we start to move through the centuries, peppers become really popular. Of course, not to mention the importance of garlic, and then really good quality salt. So again, because they're close to the ocean, salt is something that is paramount. And so then we start seeing salted meats, and that's where we see the antipasto, which we're going to see in a minute. So cured meats, always from salt and garlic, become the traditional way to preserve the meats when you aren't lucky enough to have fresh meats. So let's talk a little bit about the style of the meal. In the American tradition, where might we have a salad? In the beginning. Not so in the Italian meal. Anybody know where this comes? At the end. Yes, in the end. And there's a real purpose behind it. So aiding in digestion is the whole reason why you have your greens. So I did a little research on, kind of the physiology behind this. I couldn't really find any good rationale why you'd want it at the end of the meal instead of the beginning. But, who knows? Somebody decided that was the case. And gosh, I could probably keep researching and find some rationale, but yet I haven't. But I also love the way it's dressed. So we don't see the heavy sauces. We don't even really see a lot of cheese added to this segment of the meal. When I worked in this cute little Italian restaurant, his salad, which he always ate, so he was a little Italian guy that was probably in his late 60s when I met him, and I worked for him for about 8 years, so he, definitely aged. But he always had his own salad, and it was always with fresh lemon juice, fresh olive oil, and salt and pepper. So only those ingredients. And the American style, we've changed to a creamy dressing and lots of it, and lots of different things in the salad. And that's definitely not the Italian tradition. It's purely fresh greens. So you've heard of the muslin mix. The spring mix is kind of that same idea. And verdicchio and radicchio. So all those very strong lettuces that were traditionally used as that post-meal element. And so here, the antipasto is before the meal. So this is where you see the cured meats and the olives and the veggies, and definitely never see bread served before the meal. Bread's not even really served with the meal, which I thought was so interesting. It's a side dish, and wait till you see the comparison of their bread versus kind of how we've evolved the Italian garlic bread. But I love the fact that this is where you see all the cured items, and you see some sharp flavor, so it kind of prepares the palate for the meal. It kind of heightens the appetite is what they think of. And it always has some fresh vegetables. So you see the little bit of cherry tomatoes. In the antipasto that I used to prepare when I worked in that Italian place, it would sometimes have fresh fennel. It would have radishes. It might have other kinds of leeks or onions. Anything that you could eat raw. I never saw carrots, which now we kind of see it in our style, right? Celery and carrots. Didn't really see any of that.
Too common.
But, it might be. It might be. And then we have this beautiful application of the herbs. And so, of course, you know about the pesto. It originated as a way to use this crop where you get an abundance of it. Has anybody ever grown basil? Yes. Do you,
Loaded with it now. It's sort of, they're not pretty when they come out, but you can still, have the flavor. So it's kind of fun.
I love that. And so what we're seeing is the tradition is when the plant starts being profusely productive, the home cook didn't want to waste anything. And so mixing it with the olive oil was truly the way to preserve the basil. And so now you've got this ready access. And remember, the tomato-based sauce really wasn't as common as an herb-based sauce. And so that's why the pesto became so valuable. And so again, olive oil. And then look at this. This is where pine nuts come in. And of course, at Powerhouse Bakery, we use the hemp hearts in place of pine nuts. Why? Well, because I just wanted to do a fusion of this super healthy, seed, but pine nuts are really a tradition. Anybody ever use pine nuts?
All the time.
Yes. Can you describe it?
They're just little bitty, my husband says they're smooth.
Yes.
Very smooth nut. And we roast them on the stove and then throw them into everything under the stove.
I love it because they are
Warm
so...
salad, cold salad, everything.
Oh, because they're so high in fat. So your smooth characteristic was right on. And that's because the fat content is so high. So it really makes a great sauce. So, garlic bread. So different in the Italian cuisine. It is really a crostini. So it's an unbuttered, plain piece of toast. And then a very small amount of sauce added to it. It might be a little bit of melted cheese. It might be a little bit of olive oil versus how have we changed it to this beautiful rendition of our garlic bread, right? The more the better, baby. Soak it rich with butter and olive oil. I even saw a recipe adding mayonnaise. Yeah, so it's definitely gone in the other direction. Now, up here in the top corner is Powerhouse Bakery's little rosemary dinner rolls. And so I put those there because, again, very different. But using the rosemary does kind of bring it into the flavor profile of an Italian specialty treat. The baguette is really a French influence. The Italian bread is typically softer and a little bit more doughy. So it will have a sourdough element, and it has a little bit of a white texture rather than, a high yeast bread. But always, there's going to be sides to add to it. And I included this one too because in the top there, the little pommes frites, which is the French fries, another very traditional way of an Italian way to serve French fries is with lemon juice, salt and pepper. So not the typical ketchup at all. But it's fun to see how something starts in a country and then we transform it and we make some variations. So it's all good. So arancini. This is rice And so I mentioned pasta is one, pizza is one. Now we're going to see all these other very traditional comfort foods that you find in the streets of Italy. So sometimes it's round, like kind of, you can hold it in your hand. I guess, yeah, he's showing it there. It's also sometimes like a cone. And this was originally created like that to sort of give homage to this Mount Etna. So arborio rice is a very specific kind of rice. Anybody ever use that? You want to describe it?
Gosh. It's not like a typical grain of rice. It's more, I don't know what's
It's not a long grain.
It's not. It's very short and fat.
Short,
So it's very high in starch. And so it makes a really good hearty dish because, yes, it is. It's very creamy. Risotto uses arborio rice. So it's cooked differently. Instead of it being steamed, you slow cook it, and it causes that starch to really be in full bloom. And so that's what carries that wonderful flavor. So it's eaten as a snack. So again, a street food would be something like you'd eat afternoon or midday. Traditionally, the way that the culture is, and I'll show you this slide in a second, but breakfast is quite small, very insignificant. And the afternoon meal is the primary meal, really in all of the Mediterranean culture. And so these little street foods are little snacks that you see in between.
Why does that look deep fried, Susan?
It's not deep fried. It might just be the way the picture kind of is rendered, but
It has a crust like a-
yes, it's baked. So when you mix the rice, and it sometimes will have meat, sometimes not, tomato sauce, some different herbs and peas, it's broiled. So you see how the cheese gets melty on the top? So it's all the ingredients are mixed, put into this little cone, and then it's broiled. Super cool though. Oh, and the beautiful tiramisu. Has anybody had a tiramisu? Yes. Who hasn't, right? And they're so different from one place to the other. But the real consistency is supposed to be with these three ingredients. So ricotta, biscotti, and of course some chocolate. And I didn't spend a lot of time on this slide, but I couldn't resist that beautiful picture. So, so neat.
St. Louis is great with their tiramisu.
Yeah?
On the hill.
Ooh, so neat.
Very good.
Here's a really fun one. Bacala manchecato. So characteristic street food that is made from fish. So remember, think of the geography that we're working with. We've got a big mountain range that goes all the way down all of Italy. And then on the western side, you've got all the sea and all those islands. So this is actually a cod fish, and it looks like cream has been added. But no cream at all has been added to this. Instead, there's a very important technique of a slow, almost boil. And so the water is heavily spiced with laurel and olive oil, garlic and lemon, of course, salt and pepper. And the fish is very slowly steamed or boiled so that it becomes very soft. And then it's the technique of whipping or breaking apart of this fish so it has a super delicate texture. So yeah, I read all about these different recipes, and I had so much fun experimenting with these different styles. It has a little bit of a crispy, almost toast that goes with it, and it's just fish with the olive oil and the lemon and spices. So just beautiful. And chefs really brag when they can do this right, because it almost feels like in your mouth that you have a creamy dish, and it's really just the fish. So.
What is laurel?
Laurel is an herb, so it looks very much like sage, and I'm sorry I didn't get a picture of it. I meant to, and I ran out of time, but it looks like sage. It's a little bit longer and thinner. So we will definitely work with some laurel, Paula, when we're at Powerhouse Bakery, because I love that one. Look at this one. So let's just stop for a second. The Mediterranean is not all vegan. So I want to make sure you know that the Mediterranean diet does include fish and meat. And of course, the base becomes vegetables that are in season and herbs that are used to season. So look at this beautiful dish. And this is a beef. It's very specific beef, the Chinina cattle. And so again, their heritage, they're very proud of the kind of cattle they raise. And so this is a very unique dish you cannot get in the US because these cattle are only raised in certain areas of Italy. And so the technique around cooking this is kind of what I mentioned, all about the application of heat and the application of how you cut the meat. It always has a bone. Whenever you cook a meat with a bone, what happens? It has more flavor and more fat because the bone gives it so much extra flavor. So very hot skillet. It has to be exactly 3 fingers thick, and that's part of getting that right cooking process. And so they really go into lots of detail as far as how to get this beautiful look and flavor of this charred meat. Rosemary, sage, and of course the fresh ground salt and pepper. And in Italy, you do not see a salt shaker on a table. What kind of pepper do you think is applied in the Italian kitchen? Fresh ground only. And that's because when we're looking at the best quality ingredients, never would we pre-grind pepper because you get all the aromatics right at the source of the grinding. So you get all the good flavors. I remember that was a very important thing I learned when I worked at this Italian place is that when we served our carbonara or we served our linguine clams, you offer pepper at the table, always, always. And people that said no, I thought, oh, you're missing out. That's part of the dish. Here's another fun one. Cacacho e pepe, and another very important comfort food. I can just imagine kids asking for this dish because it's so simple and just a favorite. And so now it's world renowned, but really just cheese and pepper is the only thing that seasons this dish. And different areas of Italy will use a different type of pasta. We've got tagliarini, and we've got linguine, and we've got rigatoni and penne. But the tagliarini is the very thin pasta noodle, and it's the favorite in this dish. So different types of cheeses are used. Fontaine is the one that's most popular, and then they'll usually add another couple of cheeses to go with that. But don't you just want to try that? This looks so good. And this one, I promise you, is going on Power's Bakery menu. I cannot wait. Caponata, a Sicilian favorite made from eggplant, not to mention peppers and onion. Here's the pine nuts again. Olives and tomatoes, capers. And then as you serve it, you even add a hint of balsamic vinegar. I mean, doesn't that just make your jaw drop? And it reminds me of a couple of other dishes that we use a lot. Sofrito and even the ratatouille. So the ratatouille is the French version of this. And so it's eggplant and peppers and, of course, some garlic. Where this one varies, which I think is so neat, is the element of savory. Adding capers and, of course, olives makes this dish truly Italian, whereas the French version adds in fresh basil. And so while you see some wonderful overlap, you see some really nice distinctions that really tip their hat to the Italians versus the French. But I cannot wait to make this. Now, also when I'm looking at the picture, it looks like some of the dark color is from the olive, so probably a Kalamata olive. It's also possible that they're not peeling the eggplant, which makes me so excited because I think that gives it such a good texture. But this one's going to be very fun to make. What might we serve it over? Rice, or maybe some tagliarini, or maybe just eat it plain. Something that's really fun in the Italian culture is they don't typically have bread with the meal, but they have other vegetables. And so this could be served with a side of vegetables. It could be roasted, could be grilled. And of course, in other regions, meat is served as that main lunch meal, meat or seafood. And this would be fantastic atop a fillet of cod or salmon or even halibut. So, breakfast of champions, not what we would think, right? What are we taught here in the US? That the breakfast is the most important meal of the day. We need to have some protein. We need to make sure it's, lots of calories. The little adage is you eat breakfast like a king, lunch like a prince, and dinner like a pauper, something like that. That does not apply in the Mediterranean. Right? Simple, light breakfast. In fact, when I lived with my French family, I loved the pain grillé, which was just a little piece of French baguette toasted with a little jam on it or just fresh butter. Oh my gosh, it was so good. And always the espresso. So that beautiful cup of coffee and simple delight. Now, of course, I put a picture up here of a croissant, which is a wonderful fusion. Italians certainly use bread of sorts that has added fat to it. So whether it be butter or olive oil is definitely something you'll see in the Italian kitchen. Interesting though, when we look at espresso and coffee, we think of an Italian coffee. When we go to Starbucks and we get an Italian coffee, we think, well, of course they're the ones that invented the cappuccino, but actually that is not the case. When you're in the streets of Italy, you don't easily find fancy, frothy, milk-based drinks. It's much more common to see just pure espresso. Sometimes they'll add a twist of lemon to the espresso. Have you ever tried that?
My husband does.
Oh, I love it. My dad would always order an espresso with a twist of lemon.
How does it make it taste?
You know what I think, Rachel, is there's all these aromas going on. Nothing like the rind of a lemon to just fill the room with citrus. And then a fresh pressed espresso is another just incredibly aromatic experience. And so it's so fun to have all these aromas. So you're enjoying the aroma as much as the flavor. And so then you have this nice nuance of bitter. And of course, with espresso, there's a layer of sweet if it's pulled correctly. And then you have a little touch of the citrus, which is now going to be a little sweet and sour. So it touches all the areas of the palate, which I just love. And so as we salute the new year, one other thing that I just loved in this whole process of studying the Italian culture is, look at this. What they eat for their celebration of the new year is lentils. And their whole tradition is around bringing wealth, both in health and prosperity, and it's celebrated in a bag of lentils because it looks like a bag of gold coins. Isn't that amazing? And so with a little more study, I'm going to find some traditional ways that they prepare lentils, because I'm going to be trying that out because we love to use those. And again, certain regions of Italy will grow lentils better than others because it needs to have a lot of water and lots of good grassland. So what I propose we do is we need to get cooking. And I'm sad that we didn't have God Gift here, because she specifically wanted us to start cooking. And so she really sparked my interest in digging deeper into the Mediterranean culture. And so I wanted to spend the last couple of minutes just kind of getting some feedback or some ideas of what kinds of things we would like to cook as we go through the rest of February. But just to give you a little summary, my plan is that in February, we're going to celebrate Italy, and then we're going to go to at least 3 other countries in the Mediterranean so we can really see how this fusion of the cultures around the sea will impact our health and our longevity as we learn from these historic and wonderful cultures. So thank you so much for joining me, and hope to see you next time.